Hello, it's me, Mike, with HPDS. This video will be a reading and study of Exodus chapter 7. That's Exodus chapter 7. So let me go ahead and before I get started, I will read the Lord's Prayer. So, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So I'd go ahead and ask that you please like the video and subscribe to the channel for future chapter by chapter Bible study. So this will be Exodus chapter 7. And let me go ahead and get into what we're looking at and get into my outline. Here we see Exodus chapter 7. I forgot to put the little number, but I'll go ahead. The Exodus chapter 7, the Lord stretches out his hand. And what we're looking for in this chapter is that we're going to see in verses 1 through 7 that the Lord stretches out his hand. And in verses 8 through 13, we're going to see Aaron's staff becomes a serpent. And then towards the end, verses 14 through 25, we're going to see the first plague in which water is going to turn into blood. And so this is the famous, this is one of the famous parts of Exodus, what we know now as the 10 plagues. Here they are being introduced, and it's not being introduced in any particular way. It's not being saying, here I'm going to do 10 plagues for the people. That's not what he was saying. He just kind of says, I'm gonna multiply the plagues. But we find out, obviously that there ends up being 10 of them. And the first one we're gonna see already starting in Exodus 7. Keep in mind, Exodus is about 40 chapters long. So we are seeing at the beginning of the 10 plagues is starting already here in chapter 7. And once again, we haven't given much thought to Moses' life beforehand. We'll see, and I believe we're going to see in this, we're going to see in this chapter that Moses and his brother are about 80 years old. And his brother's Aaron is 83. And so these guys are 80-year-old men. And we haven't really heard much about their lives at all up until this point. Obviously, we remember hearing about Moses killing the man 40 years earlier. But this is 40 years after the only real story we came across. One of the two stories. We heard that story about him murdering, and we read about the story about how he came across his his wife's, how he came across his wife, in fact, how he met his wife. And then obviously that we're past that. They're going to be 80 years old. We'll read that in this chapter. And once again, this is continuing on from chapter 6. And remember, in chapter 6, we're already past the part where Moses has gone and he's told Pharaoh, let the people go. And Pharaoh has refused, saying, I don't know this God. I don't know his name. I don't know nothing about him. You people belong to me, and so forth. And he's done that. The people are, mad with Moses. Moses is kind of real unbelieving of God. He's just saying, all you've done is, is brought bad things ever since I came across you, God. That's how Moses is acting. And then we came across the genealogy. Remember, it was the start of the legal document back in chapter 6. So God prefaces he's going to bring the plagues upon this nation, and he's doing it legally. If you notice, like I said, he filed a complaint, and now he's saying, now after this complaint has been made, I'm going to do this, and he's going to lay out everything he does until he lets his children go. And this is how God, he's at war with the Pharaoh. I mean, this is his people are now in servitude, um, and God is now going to conduct warfare against the Egyptians, and he's going to utterly destroy them. And we're going to see that over the next few chapters. But he has done it legally, and you can see that he has filed his complaint. Here's chapter 6 is the genealogy to explaining who and what the property is and so forth. And next he's going to start outlining the plagues, which are just going to be like moves. This is how God conducts warfare. No other man can control the elements of nature like God can, and so therefore no one can conduct warfare like God does. But this is how He is conducting warfare, and we're gonna see it starting in this chapter. It's gonna be kind of foreshadowing with this first plague. But I'll go ahead and read Exodus chapter 7 now, and then like I said, I'll come back and read it line by line, and we'll see what the Holy Spirit brings forth to me. So, like I said, once again, one more time, just go ahead and please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And let me get started. Let's see, Exodus chapter 7 here, King James Bible. It reads, "And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. Thou shalt speak all that I command thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh, that he send the children of Israel out of his land. And I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt. But Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt, and bring forth mine armies, and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt, and bring out the children of Israel from among them. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron 80 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, When Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, Show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, Take thy rod, and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers. Now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments, for they cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. But Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And he hardened Pharaoh's heart, that he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, he refuseth to let the people go. And get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning. Lo, he goeth out unto the water, and thou shalt stand by the river's brink against he come. And the rod which was turned to a serpent shalt thou take in thine hand. And thou shalt say unto them, The Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent me unto thee, saying, Let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto thou wouldest not hear. Thus saith the Lord, In this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Behold, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters which are in the river, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, and the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. And the Lord spake unto Moses, Say unto Aaron, Take thy rod, and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, that they may become blood, and that there may be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, both in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. And Moses and Aaron did so, as the Lord commanded. And he lifted up the rod, and smote the waters that were in the river, in the sight of Pharaoh, and in the sight of his servants. And all the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank. And the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. And the magicians of Egypt did so with their enchantments, and Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Neither did he hearken unto them as the Lord had said. And the Pharaoh turned and went into his house, neither did he set his heart to this also. And all the Egyptians digged round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river. And 7 days were fulfilled after that the Lord had smitten the river. So yeah, that's Exodus chapter 7 in its entirety. Excuse me. Yep, chapter 7, Exodus chapter 7. And to go ahead and like I said, what I like to do is give you the outline once again after I've read this so that we can kind of comprehend what I just read, because when you read things, it's never really just something that sinks in. You just read it and kind of zone out, just like when you drive. So Exodus chapter 7, what did we read? Verses 1 through 7, we read that the Lord stretched out his hand. So he starts telling Moses what's about to happen. That he's gonna say, he says, I will harden Pharaoh's heart and multiply my signs and my wonders in the land of Egypt. So just like I was saying, he's gonna multiply. He's not giving a specific number right here. We know it to be 10. But this is not really, he's not saying I'm gonna do 10 I'm gonna do 10 plagues. No, it just ends up being 10. And that's what he's telling them right here. I'm gonna multiply them, and I'm gonna harden Pharaoh's heart. And remember, these are things that back in chapter 3, I believe, is when God made this prophecy. Remember God's prophecy, the Lord's makes a prophecy back at the end of Exodus 3. He was the one that said, you're gonna go and you're gonna talk to Pharaoh and you're gonna make this request, but he's not gonna let you go, not by what did he say at the end? Not by he says, and I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt. Oh no, and I am sure that the king of Egypt will not let you go. No, not by a mighty hand. This is Exodus 3, verse 19. And I will stretch out my hand. This is verse 20. And I will stretch out my hand and smite Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in the midst thereof. And after that, he will let you go. So remember, that was his prophecy that you're going to tell him, but he's not going to let you, and he's not going to let you until he's forced to. And here God is about to start forcing Pharaoh to do so. But we're going to see that, at first, Pharaoh's really resistant. He doesn't really think much of it. So that's what the Lord is telling him. That's the verses 1 through 7. He's the start of, I'm going to start stretching out my hand now, which we've been hearing about. And in verses 8 through 13, we read that Aaron's staff becomes a serpent. And so I read over that portion in which Aaron, throws the staff, but the Egyptians come back and they're going to have their magicians, as we call it. And these people are those people are just like the people of today. And I'll just call them scientists. But that's what they are. They're basically soothsayers, people that are trying to say that, the world is logical and reasonable, and everything happens for a reason, and nothing cannot be unexplained. And I'm not promoting supernatural activity or anything, but when it comes to God, God can bend every single law everything that we know can be completely flipped on its head, because God has that power to do as he sees fit. As he desires, and we're going to see that because, like I said, right here, he's going to start showing his powers over nature. As I was stating earlier, he's going to start showing his powers, and he does that starting in verses 14, and he does that through the end of this chapter, where he's going to do the first plague, where he turns water to water. The whole river is going to turn into blood. The water, and of course, if you know anything later about the Bible, coming across Jesus Christ, we know that his first miracle was turning water into wine. And here we have God's first plague against the Egyptians, and it's water into blood. So keep that in mind, how this kind of works out like that, how symbology is all over the place in the Bible. There's symbology because God is showing up as supernatural experiences for these people and for the world. And when he shows up as supernatural experiences, he doesn't necessarily show up as a man. Like he did when he came across, when he came over as Jesus, and when he showed up as Jesus, obviously he came as a man, and suddenly a lot of this, he was explaining all the symbols because here they're going to see God, but they don't see him in the form of a man. God, he's just talking. He showed up as a burning bush, and he's just appearing to God. I mean, God is just appearing to Moses, and probably at this point in prayer. He's not even showing up like as a man. And then later on, we're going to see him out in the desert. He's going to be a big pillar of fire, big cloud of fire, and so forth. But they're not seeing him like a man. They're only seeing the symbols, and it's not until they see Jesus does Jesus start, you know, making himself equal to God, and that's what really offends the people, the leaders of his time, who ended up killing him and so forth. But yeah, this is chapter 7. Like I said, the Lord stretches out his hands. Pharaoh's staff becomes a serpent, and then the first plague, the water into blood. That's this chapter. Let me go back through it and read it line by line, and we'll see once again what the Holy Spirit brings. So let me get this situated. All right, here we go. And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. So once again, this is coming from earlier. This is coming from chapter 4. Remember let's go back to chapter 4. And I want to say it was like chapter 4, something like 16. So let me see. And he shall be thy spokesman. So right here, he was talking about it because remember, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And so he makes Aaron his spokesman. And so he's saying, and he shall be thy spokesman. And that's what he's getting at. And he shall, so this is why we're already getting into that. It's very official. And he's telling them that's what this is coming from. That he's going right back to that, telling them exactly like it was. It was very official. He's very prophetic. The word is prophetic that I'm thinking of. He made a prophecy, and now he's fulfilling the prophecy. That's what God does, and that's what he's showing him. He's now you're gonna go, and he does that. Aaron shall be your prophet. You're gonna talk. He says, Thou shalt speak all that I commanded thee, and Aaron thy brother shall speak unto Pharaoh. So just like he was told, that's exactly how it's happening. And he's supposed to tell him to send the children of Israel out of his land. But going back to that prophecy back at the beginning, at the end of chapter 3 of Exodus, God is telling Moses, but I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart and I'm going to multiply my signs. So I'm doing this for a reason is what he's telling him. He's saying, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart. So this is something like we got to keep in mind that God is telling this to Moses. And Moses is telling, so Pharaoh is acting like a completely, and like an antithesis, and like he's against God here. But Moses has got so how do I explain this? Moses is trying to show his people about God. He's trying to show his people God and all this, because God has commanded it of Moses. But the people, they don't know anything about God, right? Or they don't know much about him, and they're all very confused about it. And so Pharaoh is acting as that kind of person that completely doesn't believe in God. He is the famous person here for all the people because these people, they were kind of watching their leaders. Like, remember, if you go back to what I had spoken about in Joseph in Genesis, back in the later chapters of Genesis, what had happened with him is that all of the people of Egypt were really into his story. They were really, everybody heard about when his father came back. Everybody heard about when he met his brothers again and how he cried there with them, and everybody heard about that. They were really involved in his life because he was a real famous man. He was Joseph. He was famous. And back then they didn't have, television or even necessarily newspapers or any of that kind of thing. They were still just early on in history. And I mean, all we got these written records from Moses, which are incredible in themselves. So they did have writing, but keep in mind the writing was done by the highest levels. I mean, here, this guy that wrote and left his record, I mean, it only is possible because, he was literally, God was with him. But that's not to say that all of these people were able to read and write, or were they able to gather the materials required to, say, make paper and to sustain any kind of news, So everything was kind of by word of mouth. Everybody, all the people were probably staying real close together. Everybody, the town was real, everybody was real close. Having to see each other. They were constantly, in contact with each other, because to be out of contact with each other, especially when we see them later on, they're going to be lost in the desert. So if they got lost from the group, there's no telling what was going on out there. So they were really involved in these famous people's lives, and so Pharaoh is acting as the non-believer over here. So the people, and he's acting like that for the sake of the children of Israel, who themselves, Moses wasn't even circumcising his children. He wasn't even, he didn't know who God was. He was trying to say that, give me a name. Which God are you? Kind of like, which God are you? Give me a name so I know which God I'm talking to over here. But God is telling them, nope. Remember, I'm one person. He's giving them, I'm one God. And he's showing them, I'm in control. I'm going to show you all these magical powers, all these supernatural powers, all these miracles, these, and he's telling them, and look, for all of you guys that don't believe that I exist, take a look at Pharaoh, who is the most famous of the unbelievers over here. Take a look at what's going to happen to him, children of Israel, and do not be like this man, is what God is showing him. I'm going to harden his heart. So Moses knows this. Moses is being told that, look, Pharaoh is like a puppet to me, is what God is saying. God, I'm in control of even Pharaoh's heart over here. I'm in control of Pharaoh's heart. He could have made him a little bit more, and we do see that. Remember at the end of chapter 3, that prophecy, what does he say? So he says he's going to harden the heart of Pharaoh, right? But right here at the end of Genesis 23, Genesis 23:21, it says, and I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And it shall come to pass that when ye go, ye shall not go empty, but every woman shall borrow of her neighbor and of her that sojourneth in her house jewels of silver and jewels of gold and raiment, and ye shall put them upon your sons and upon your daughters, and ye shall spoil the Egyptians. So God is saying that I'm going to harden Pharaoh's heart, but all the other people, he's going to give them, they're going to be favorable of you. So God is showing outright that he's telling them, and Moses should be understanding this, that Moses is being told that God is in control of their hearts, and he is hardening Pharaoh's heart for the sake of these children so that they may see. And that's what Moses is contending with. He's being told this, like, he already knows what's going to happen. And for him, it's kind of like, well, I already know what's going to happen. But everybody else, they don't really necessarily know, or they don't necessarily believe. And so that's why God is showing that this is going to be a testament for you people. I'm going to give y'all proof of my existence. And so these chosen people are going to get this great proof of God's existence right here. And this is the historical documents of what they got to see and what they got to understand and come across. And so he says, so I'm going to harden his heart. But he goes on, but Pharaoh shall not hearken unto you, that I may lay my hand upon Egypt and bring forth mine armies and my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great judgments. So you see, that's what God is saying. I'm doing this for a reason. I can change Pharaoh's heart, just like I'm going to change the heart of the Egyptians, but I'm doing it to show you all these things, so that the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I stretch forth mine hand upon Egypt. So he's doing this for the sake of not just the children of Israel, but for the sake of the Egyptians, so that even the Egyptians know who God is. So even the Egyptians here, even though that's why we're seeing, that's why Egypt is still a country to this day. Egypt is still around, and Egypt is known for its great pyramids and so forth, and it's also known for a lot of pagan beliefs. So but God does tell them that, even they should know, even the Egyptians have come across this God, even though they are great pagans and are constantly looking for, constantly had different gods to worship. Uh, they have come across and they have felt the power of the real Lord, the only Lord, the true Lord. Historically, that is what the case is, and they're also responsible for understanding that. God says they know about Him. They should know about Him. They know that He's the Lord. They have no excuse for not knowing. But He's doing it for the Egyptians as well, so that everybody knows that He's God, and He's doing it for the children of Israel, and He's doing it for the Egyptians. He's doing it for everybody. Everybody's benefiting from what's about to happen. Even though it doesn't necessarily seem that way, everybody is benefiting. And Moses and Aaron did as the Lord commanded them, so did they. And Moses was 80 years old, and Aaron's 80 years old, when they spake unto Pharaoh. So, of course, a score is 20 years. So he was 80 years old, and Aaron, his brother, was 83 years old. So Aaron's the older brother, Moses is the younger brother. And if you remember, they were brothers over here. But yeah, they're 80 years old, and this is just about to happen. That's Lord stretching out His hand over there. That's what He's telling them. That's what verses 1 through 7 were, and then we're gonna move into where they go, and verses 8 through 13 is gonna be the staff become Aaron's staff is about to become a serpent. So here it goes, and the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, when Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, show a miracle for you, then thou shalt say unto Aaron, take thy rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent. And Moses and Aaron went in unto Pharaoh, and they did so as the Lord had commanded. And Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. So this is just like what had happened in, I want to say it was chapter 5. No, it was chapter 4 as well. It goes back to chapter 4. They were given the miracles back in chapter 4. And remember, Moses stuck his hand in his breast and it came out leprous. And then he also threw his rod on the ground and it became a serpent. And so now we're seeing that Pharaoh doesn't even get to see, the children of Israel saw this. Remember those people, they did see it. But now he's going to Pharaoh and he's not even doing the leprous hand. He's just going straight to the serpent. So that's something to keep in mind as well, because that leprous hand is something, it's a very symbolic reasoning that's a scary sign, and I spoke of it back in the video on chapter 4, but I did make mention, he's putting his hand in there and he's pulling it out and it's leprous, and then he's putting it back in and it's coming out just fine. So it's real scary for Moses to have this kind of a sign from God. You don't really necessarily, say, hey, God, give me a sign of your existence. And he's like, all right, put your hand in. It comes out leprous and puts it out. It's kind of a scary sign because you don't necessarily know what it means. And he's showing that he has control over your entire body over here. He could make you leprous or he could make you clean. And so he's really trying to show you he could do to you whatever he wants. He is God. And we should really be very fearful of this God, because God can do incredible things. And Moses can't do that. Moses is, he's at God's mercy over here when he sees something like that. So he's skipping completely over that one. Pharaoh doesn't even see that. He's just seeing straight to the spokesman of God over here, which is Moses acting as God to Pharaoh and Aaron over here. And his spokesman, Aaron, is just going to, he tells him, Pharaoh shall speak unto you, saying, show a miracle. And so he tells him that Pharaoh is going to ask you for a miracle from your God. So this is something that, like I said, this comes from their paganism. They believe in many gods, and the thing about their gods is they, eventually a god is only a god because he has special powers. Ultimately, he's like an X-Man, if you think about it in today's understanding, a comic book hero kind of deal. He's got superpowers, and a god has superpowers. And so Pharaoh, of course, he doesn't know anything about this god. He's making a mockery. He says, "Well, we got plenty of gods. There's many gods. Which god? I don't know anything about your god. Show me a miracle from your god." And so he finally, when he asked that, that's exactly what uh, God tells him going to happen, and he tells, "Go ahead and take the rod and cast it before Pharaoh, and it shall become a serpent." So that's that second sign that Moses received. And once again, remember, the children of Israel have already seen this sign, and now Pharaoh is seeing this sign. So they go up into, right here we get into it. Moses and Aaron went into Pharaoh, and they commanded, they did as Lord commanded, and Aaron cast down his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and it became a serpent. However, just as getting into verse 11, we see out the magicians, the sorcerers, now the magicians. So now Pharaoh also called the wise men and the sorcerers, now the magicians of Egypt, they also did in like manner with their enchantments. So somehow these guys were able to come out and they did pretty much the exact same thing. So they were able to take a rod and throw it down and it became serpents. Um, but we'll see that obviously something was going on, because when they cast, they did it. Every man cast down every man his rod, and they became serpents. However, we see that Aaron's rod swallowed up their rods. And so that's getting into God's power, because these guys were able to produce this so-called kind of miracle, this so-called, that's what, a sign, a miracle. They were able to do some sort of magic trick. And of course, we know, if you know anything about magicians, we've been benefited with seeing the powers that, say, David Copperfield or the Blaine guy or Chris Angel. There's a few magicians out there, and I'm not gonna give them any kind of props or anything, but if you've ever watched their shows, you'll see that they're filled with tricks, and they tell you their tricks, and they tell you themselves that they have no supernatural powers. They're just doing sleight of hand, very tricky tricks. They're being very deceptive, but ultimately they're doing tricks. That's why they're called magic tricks, and that's what these sorcerers did. They came out and they said, "Oh, well, that's not really a real sign, because we could do that too. We got this magic trick too. Look at us." And they did it, but they saw something where Aaron's swallow. So they were doing tricks more than likely, but we see that Aaron's rod was actually becoming a real serpent. And his serpent actually ate up their rod. So you see that God is showing that even though you guys are doing little tricks, I am not tricking you guys. I am showing you something that is impossible. And he did something impossible. But of course, we move in, and he hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he hearkened not unto them, as the Lord had said. And the Lord said unto Moses, Pharaoh's heart is hardened; he refuseth to let the people go. So you see, we're getting into that's 6-14, in which, well, not 6-14, but 8-13 over here. That's the staff. Aaron's staff becomes a serpent. And then the rest of the chapter, starting with 14, this is going to be devoted to this first plague. So he's telling them. So Moses, it's very, straightforward. God is telling them, look, Pharaoh's not listening, just like I told you he wasn't going to listen. So now I'm going to begin to force him. And Lord, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. So now he's telling him, so now go ahead and go into Pharaoh in the morning, when he's out in the water, and thou shalt stand by the river brink against he comes. So when he comes, you're going to be standing out there, and you're going to take that rod, which turned into a serpent, and you're going to tell him, the Lord God of the Hebrews hath sent unto me, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. And behold, hitherto thou wouldest not hear. So he's being, once again, very legalistic. He's saying, he's repeating everything. He's saying, I know you understand me. You understand me. Everything I've made it clear what we want, what God wants, who wants it, why he wants it, because, we're the firstborn, so forth, etc., etc. He's made it very clear. And you have not let my people go. You still haven't heard. So now uh, he's just repeating it. You haven't listened. You wouldn't hear. So thus saith the Lord, in this thou shalt know that I am the Lord. So now he's telling them, here, go ahead. Now here's your real miracle. If you wouldn't accept that first miracle, here's another miracle for you. He said, I will smite with the rod that is in mine hand upon the waters, and they shall be turned to blood. And the fish that is in the river shall die, the river shall stink, and the Egyptians shall loathe to drink of the water of the river. And so that's what he's saying. So he's giving them this sign. This is Moses. And so then he's gonna smash. He's gonna smite with the rod. He's gonna smash it. He's gonna put his rod into the water over here, and it's gonna be turned to blood, and everything's gonna die, and it's gonna stink, and no one's gonna want to drink this water. It's gonna be bad. And he goes, and it's all because you didn't want to hear this little request. So God is starting to creep up into the life of Pharaoh in a way that Pharaoh should have already seen it. He should have already known that this was God coming, but he didn't notice God coming. And so now God is coming to war with him, and it's already getting to be too late. You get what I'm saying? He's already turning the water into blood. And the Lord spake unto Moses, say unto Aaron, take thy rod, and stretch out thine hand upon the waters of Egypt, upon their streams, upon their rivers, and upon their ponds, and upon all their pools of water, they may become blood. So that's what happens. So Moses tells Aaron to do it, and Moses and Aaron did so. So that's how God tells him. God tells Moses and Aaron both to go out there, and they make it very dramatic. So it's all being very dramatic in front of the Pharaoh. Moses is doing the talking over here, and then he commands Aaron what to do. Aaron does it. So he says, Aaron did so as the Lord commanded. He lifted up the rod and smote the waters. So he, probably just smashed the rod onto the water, kind of like hit the water while he was standing in it, right there in the sight of Pharaoh and all his servants. And then all of a sudden, the waters that were in the river were turned to blood. And just like Moses told God, and just like God told Moses, and Moses told Pharaoh, the fish that was in the river died, and the river stank, and the Egyptians could not drink of the water of the river, and there was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. And of course, here come the magicians again, and they did so with their enchantments. So they came and said, oh, that's not really a big deal. We could do it too. So they come, and somehow they came and they started turning water into blood, just like another little magic trick. And so Pharaoh, of course, still wasn't convinced. So he's over here seeing something impossible. He's seeing this whole river turn to blood, an impossible thing, but he's still not, he just gets, his heart hardens. He gets angry about the whole situation, and he gets, he's not happy with it. He says, so big deal. We can do that too. Our technology is to that point. That's kind of his concept over here. He's all, my smart guys, my magicians, my smart, my scientists, they can do that too. So it's not a big deal. You're just something that's happening at random, something that's fully, something that we can fully replicate and redo, and you're just doing something, some sort of a trick, Moses. It's not a real proof of God or anything. That's how Pharaoh is acting. That's what it means by his heart is hardened. And Pharaoh turned and went into his house. Neither did he set his heart to this also. So he's still not really thinking much about this. So it's still, even though this is going on, it's a big deal. It's not really, he's not really thinking about it. It's not one of his important. It's not really important to him right now. He must have other things that's going on. And of course, it doesn't really necessarily say, but who knows what Pharaoh was tending to, what else he had going on, what kind of activities he was into, how was he spending his daily life. It doesn't really explain that, but clearly, however he was spending his daily life, he wasn't really thinking about this, which is incredible because water just turned to blood. And if that happened today in today's world, we'd obviously realize that something crazy was going on. But of course, we'd probably have these same soothsayers come in saying, oh no, this happened, and somebody spilled this, and that's why the water is now blood. And then they'd explain, blah, blah, blah. They'd explain it away, and you wouldn't think about it. So that's what's going on with Pharaoh is these magicians explained it away, told them it was no big deal. It's something they could probably fix. It's just Moses being kind of crazy out there. It's not a big deal. So it's not even on his mind. It's not even on his heart. He's not thinking about it. And all the Egyptians digged round about the river for water to drink, for they could not drink of the water of the river, and 7 days were fulfilled. After that, the Lord had smitten the river. So he's saying the water was blood for a week over here. And Pharaoh was still, and all his people had to dig around. Everybody over there, all the Egyptians had to dig. It was a huge inconvenience. It was something that clearly was a big deal, was supernatural. It was incredible. Nobody knew what was going on, and the leadership of the people in the form of Pharaoh was they didn't even care about it. Here's a natural disaster, something crazy going on, and the people literally had to build new. They had to dig around, and it happened for a whole week, and it still wasn't that big of a deal yet. That's why it's just the first of the 10 plagues, and that's chapter 7. And I'll go ahead and probably end this video right here, but that's what was going on. He still wasn't even thinking about it. His smart men, his magicians, his sorcerers, they were able to explain away this blood, this blood miracle, this water turning into blood, and instead of giving credit to God and Moses, who had just said that this was going to happen, he just told him, I'm telling you what's going to happen. I'm telling you the truth. He's the only truth out there. The other guys were just giving him, falsehoods, giving him little tricks and telling him that's probably what happened kind of stuff. And it was just, he wasn't paying attention, and his people were suffering. Already they were beginning to suffer. Already the Egyptians were beginning to suffer for the Pharaoh's disbelief and unbelief, and it's going to lead to the great downfall of the Pharaoh, which we'll see obviously later on in chapters after we see what God ultimately does to him, but like I said, I'll go ahead and end this video here. I'll say God bless you to anyone who may be watching this. I pray that we all bless Jesus Christ, and may Jesus Christ bless all of us. Amen.